Fascia interconnects our entire body, and yet it gets little attention. Explore the fascinating world of fascia and its critical role in chronic pain management and relief today with my guest, Julia Blackwell. Together, we unravel how this biological fabric interconnects every part of the body and influences our physical well-being as well as our emotional well-being more than you may expect. In this episode, we delve into common pain patterns and how this is truly a mind-body connection that is often left unexplored. Julia Blackwell is a fascia release practitioner, educator, and creator of the Fascia Remedy. She was born with severe nerve damage to her right shoulder and grew up going through the broken Western medicine system. After 23 years of being told her condition would never improve and feeling no lasting relief from any treatments, she was introduced to a unique type of fascia release bodywork in 2010. In just 3 months of this fascia-specific work, she saw more improvement in the feel and function of her arm than she had in 16 years of traditional treatments. This experience catapulted Julia into learning everything she could about fascia, the critical roles it plays in our movement and overall health, and how to restore it. After learning multiple modalities and working with clients for 12 years, she's formulated her own approach for bodywork and foam rolling work called the Fascia Remedy. Using this methodology, she's been able to solve her own bouts of low back, knee, and neck pain in a matter of days, as well as help her community of professional athletes and everyday movers quickly alleviate pain, restore movement, and perform at their best. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Unweaving Chronic Pain podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Andrea Moore, founder of the Whole Self Integration Method. And I get it, adulting is hard. No one warned us about the overwhelm of just managing a household, our own lives, the finances, the relationships, our kids, our careers, not to mention doing it all with either chronic emotional and physical pain. All too often we get stuck waiting and hoping our external circumstances are going to change or even our inner world is going to change, and only then will we be able to get out and live life. But here's the thing, unless we are actively trying to change our inner worlds and get to know ourselves deeper and better and be willing to step into resilience and, the most unsexy word ever, responsibility for our lives, we are going to be stuck in perpetual victimhood, helplessness, and powerlessness. If you are wanting to actually get up and live life, take ownership, step into personal responsibility and your personal power, and live life on your own terms, then now is the time to start. If you want to get started on your journey, the best way to do that is to book a discovery call with me. It is free. Together on it, we are going to look at where you are, where you want to go, and I'm going to help you fill in the gap of how to get there and lay out a step-by-step plan for you. Everything is individualized to you because this journey is not some protocol that looks the same for everybody. So if you're ready to get started, click the link in the show notes below. And I can't wait to talk to you. Now, getting into today's episode. Welcome, welcome, Julia. I am so excited to have you on here. How are you doing today?
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me on. I'm good.
Awesome. Yeah, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about how you got to where you are today?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's quite literally been a lifelong journey. I was almost a 10-pound baby, and in the process of being born, I got stuck. So in the effort to pull me out and, ultimately save me, but in the effort to pull me out, the doctor ended up stretching and tearing almost all of the nerves in my right shoulder. Wow. So yeah, fun times, just a great, cool way of coming into this world,
Yes.
And, I did have a big nerve regraft surgery when I was about 4 months old that did help bring my arm back online, if you will. But I still was left with quite a bit of just tension, limited range of motion, limited strength in my whole right arm. So I grew up going through the standard Western medicine protocol. I went to lots of doctors' checkups. I went to occupational therapy. I did some physical therapy, and even some of the more traditional things like massage and chiropractic. Really, I did just about anything that was an option to me in Ohio in the 90s. But really, nothing seemed to make any type of a lasting impact for me. And truthfully, most of the practitioners and doctors I saw told me that there was nothing I was going to be able to do for this thing. There was never going to be any improvement. If anything, it was going to get worse. So I should prepare myself for that. And when you hear these things from people in that authoritative role, I just assumed that that was going to be my life. So I spent most of my childhood growing up trying to ignore my arm and really did a great job of disconnecting from it. So really forgot about some of that just incessant and comfortable tension that I had because I trained myself to do it. But I still tried. I tried lots of different things over the years growing up. Tried lots of tools and gadgets, all of which ended up in like a little tool graveyard in my closet. And somehow, though, I moved to Boulder, Colorado back in 2010, and I happened to meet this lady who did a really strange and unique form of fascia release work. And I really never heard much about fascia. Having grown up with an injury, I did obsess a little bit about the medical field and learning as much as I could. So I actually went to school for exercise physiology because I was just interested in all of that anatomy and physiology stuff. But they barely mentioned fascia. Mm-hmm. And so it was a very quickly covered topic. Oh, hey, connective tissue, that's what attaches your ligaments and your tendons to your bones. And now we move on to all of these other things. So I really didn't know what it was. But just like everything else I had tried in my life, I had really no expectations. I was like, sure, you can give it a go, lady, if you want to see if this helps me, but nothing helps me, And it just took me by absolute complete surprise. I knew almost immediately that this work was different from anything that I had done. And I saw more results in the look, the feel, and the function of my arm in 3 months than I had in a literal lifetime's worth of other types of modalities, which is really exciting. I started releasing some of that tension finally. Muscles started to fire that had never been able to fire before. And I had a lot of emotional releases processing through all of this stuck and trapped trauma and energy in that area. And so I've heard from a few people that my personality changed a little bit, even through that process of really coming outside of my box and trying all kinds of different things. So now I do mountaineering and rock climbing and all kinds of things, even though I'm still kind of on my journey, but I'm in a place that I never thought was possible through this fascia release work. So needless to say, I've been obsessed with it ever since then and have been working with people to help them on a similar journey ever since.
Oh, that's so cool. And yeah, I'm so excited to hear more about like how you approach fascia work. But before I do, I want to ask you a couple questions about like your personal journey or like how you... I'm always fascinated when someone is like, I don't kind of like believe in this, right? You're kind of like approaching, I'm like, I don't really know if this is going to help. What was it that made you like, did you notice differences in the first session or like, did you kind of commit to 3 months off the bat? What made you not like go to one session and basically be like, oh, this didn't work?
Great question. So mostly what we're presented with with our options for healing these days is mostly passive, meaning we lay there and have something else do something to us. So that could be like a TENS unit or a Theragun, or it could be an actual person working on you as you lay there. But you're hoping as you lay there that someone can make a change to your body for you. And that was the bulk of most everything that I had done so far. I mean, physical therapy is a little bit more active, but there was something special about okay, she's getting really deep into this fascial tissue, and now I have to move this part of me that I've tried to ignore and I've tried to disconnect from, and now I have to move through a range of motion. And it's that movement component that really made a difference, that active movement that I had to do myself. Essentially, I had to participate in my own healing process. Was really profound, and I felt quite a bit of release of tension in the first session, which I'd had something like that happen before, but I noticed that it lasted longer than normal. And then every time I go back, it felt like I was continuing to make progress in a way that I often felt like whenever I'd go back somewhere, it was like starting all over again. You know what I mean?
Yep, absolutely.
So that's what got me hooked initially. And then I remember just feeling a change. I remember my lat firing for the first time when I was at the gym, and I was like, oh my gosh, this has never happened before. I remember we were working on my bicep, which had been one massive chunk. It was just like a tennis ball in my arm. And all of a sudden it like broke apart, and I felt like multiple clunks. That's my scientific term, clunks.
Absolutely.
It was like clunk, clunk, clunk. And I was like, whoa, that's never happened before. So it was a really cool process of being like, wait, I haven't felt this much progress before. I haven't started noticing so many things that continue to stick around. And I'm not just backtracking all the time and hoping, even 1% will stick. So it was cool.
That's really cool. Yeah, I'm just always kind of fascinated by like what makes someone persist with one thing, where it's like I feel like it's really common people, especially with chronic pain. It's like you're jumping from therapy to therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like kind of knowing where you got to just stick something out, because it does take time to see changes. But I always describe it, I'm like, sometimes there's just this like knowing. I'm like, and I love how you describe it. You're like, this feels different. Like there's just something here, and like yes to the active participant in your own body and therapy, like, or whatever you're approaching. It's so crucial.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard that too from many clients over the years. I've had a practice for 10 and a half years at this point, and that's one of the most common things that I hear from everyone is they're like, whoa, this is different. This isn't like anything I've done. And how is it possible that I already feel a little bit better? Like it doesn't take as long as, there are things, and it's not to say those are the wrong things, but there are certain things that take, 3, 6 months, even a year to really start to feel the progress. And that's hard. That's hard to wait it out. So it doesn't seem to be one of those things with fascia release when you do it in this specific way and you involve the active movement. That's one of the most common things I've heard is people are like, I can't believe how fast this is actually making a difference.
Yes. No, I love that. I feel like there's such a difference between, I always try to describe this with people, especially when I know it's going to be like a road to recovery, where it's like, you should feel different in the first 2-3 sessions. You're not going to be cured.
Right.
We're not saying that this is like overnight success. It's that like, it should be like, I'm on the right path. It should not be like exactly what you described of like, okay, maybe I felt better for an hour, 15 minutes, and then it just reverts right back. I mean, that can happen, and that just tells us, sometimes that happens, and it's just a little data about the body, and it's like, okay, but then we're doing something different because that was valuable information.
Right.
But yeah, and I think it's like there's just that knowing, I feel like, that is this, okay, something feels different and right here. So why don't you tell people, because we kind of got into things about like, what is fascia? Because there might be a lot of people listening who don't know what fascia is and are like you, that were just, I went a doctor of physical therapy, and I'm like, I don't think we really talked about fascia. We did a little bit, but not a lot.
It's a passing topic that I learned really, when I really got into it, I was like, oh my gosh, why isn't this at the forefront of what we're learning? Because it's involved in so many things. But to answer that question, so fascia is the biological fabric that holds absolutely everything in our body together. One of my favorite analogies is it's kind of like plastic wrap that wraps around every single muscle fibril, which, multiple fibrils make up just one muscle fiber. Fascia wraps around every fiber. It wraps around every muscle group, every bone, tendon, ligament, nerve, organ, blood vessel. It's like a three-dimensional plastic wrap suit that you wear on the inside. Although imagine that plastic wrap suit is also just completely saturated with oil. Like when it's healthy, it's very liquid. It's not just about the structural component. When you think of like, okay, it's organizing all of this water and material, so it's mostly about structure, right? But the hydration component and that the oil or like the water of the fascia component is really critical, which we'll dive into a little bit deeper, I'm sure, as we go along. But fascia is what allows all of our joints and muscles to glide. It's what holds our shape, structure, and posture in place. It really is what hydrates all of our tissues down to a cellular level. It's like a water irrigation system. It's what brings all of these nutrients and hydration to everything down to a cellular level. It absorbs shock. It is also a very highly sensory organ, which is giving us tons of information about our internal and external environment. It's essentially like a second nervous system, and it has a pretty profound impact on pain because it can sense so many things that are happening, whether it's a physical injury in your external environment or if it's anxiety, stress, trauma, things that we're storing inside the body. Fascia is going to respond to any of that stimulus just like the nervous system does.
Oh, yes. I love this. Can you talk more about the hydration piece? I didn't know about that, about like you talking about the irrigation piece. That's like really fascinating.
Yeah. So all of those little crisscrossing fibers, like the little three-dimensional spider web plastic wrap, there's things you can look up at a microscopic level. You can see little beads of water traveling through those little fibers, and that water travels through the fascial fibers to, again, since it wraps around everything, it's going to be able to bring water to absolutely everything. So a lot of people think when they're chronically dehydrated that, they simply need to drink more water, but that's not always necessarily the case. When fascia gets stuck, when it gets restricted, dehydrated, I think of a crumpled up ball of plastic wrap. If you dump a whole bottle of water on it, how much water is really going to get to the inside of that crumpled up ball of plastic wrap? Almost none, right?
Yes.
Yeah, probably none.
Yeah.
And so just drinking more water isn't necessarily going to solve that problem. We've got to start pulling the wrinkles back out of the plastic wrap, letting that water actually get to where it needs to go. So I've argued with many people about like, I just need to add another water bottle to my day. I'm like, well, not if you're just sitting at your desk. You're just going to be in the bathroom all day. You've got to move. You've got to do some fascia release and allow that water to actually get to where you need it to go.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Oh, I love that. That's really, I did not know about how distributed water. That's really, really cool. Thank you for sharing that. And then, can you talk a little bit more about how it responds to like anxiety and stress and things like that? Because I think that's so relevant for chronic pain, especially.
Absolutely. So our fascia is filled with free nerve endings and these things called proprioceptors, which are essentially telling your body where it is in space. But those proprioceptors are in a constant feedback loop, taking in data 24/7, again, about both the world around you and your external environment, and then internally, like what's happening on the inside. And it's going to take in that information, it's going to log it, it's going to respond if that's what needs to happen. So if we, again, pretty much all of us have experienced trauma in some way or another. We just have varying degrees of, how much or for how long.
Yeah.
And, how much that impacts our feelings of being hypervigilant or, it could be more maybe related to PTSD. But anyways, anxiety, stress, any of those things, essentially the body is going to read that as some type of a threat because your brain can't tell the difference between what's a real threat, like you are going to crash your mountain bike on the trail, and what's a perceived threat, which is like, I'm terrified to go to work because my boss is terrible. Like your brain can't tell the difference between what's that real threat. And so the main thing that our fascia does is contracts. It has its own contractile cells, which I think is really fascinating because not a lot of things do that subconsciously on their own, but fascia can contract independently of muscle. And it's not as strong as muscles, right? Like if we flex our bicep, we can feel that contraction. Most times we can't feel our fascia contracting, but that doesn't mean that it's not, right? So most of the time, fascia contracts to help us brace for an impact, maybe in the form of, again, that fall that you might have with your mountain bike. But if that threat detected is perceived and intangible in the form of stress and anxiety, your fascia is essentially bracing for an impact that never comes. And so it never receives the signal that it can let go. And that's what happens a lot with, especially with people with PTSD. They've seen fascia actually thicken over time and become really dense because it gets stuck in that contracted state. And that's so important to understand with chronic pain because chronic pain is a state of stress, right? Like whether you think about it 24/7 or not, it's surely impacting the state of your fascia and how much it can contract. So,
oh, yes. Oh, that's so good. So what is your approach and how does it differ from a traditional fascial approach?
well, I mostly operate by two main principles. So the first one is how I release fascia. And I found that while all kinds of different things can impact fascia and can help it, one of the fastest, most efficient ways is through this combination of compression and active movement. So instead of all of the passive things that we've talked about before, maybe we're just used to compression or we're just used to cross fibering, something like that. But if you can compress an area of fascia that is problematic, it's tight, it's dehydrated, and then you yourself are slowly, intentionally moving through a range of motion, it's contacting all of those receptors, both in our fascia, but also in our nervous system that says, oh, hey, we actually have access to this range of motion, or it's actually safe to be here because I can take it as far as I want, or there's something really interesting about that active component. So it seems like the combination is really powerful and can often send those signals throughout both of those communicative systems, like, hey, we can let go, we can relax, we can repattern, essentially. The second component that I work on with people a lot is the where to release fascia, because often, truthfully, almost always, where we feel the pain is not the problem. Fascia, we've been talking about it on a more holistic scale with how it might be impacted by a whole body sensation like stress, but it can also act kind of like a series of pulleys in the body. So fascia is one uninterrupted interconnected system that functions together, but it's also this series of pulleys that's meant to be balanced. And so when one area of our body starts to get some of those crumpled up plastic wrap areas, it throws everything out of balance. And where we end up feeling pain is usually a place that's being overstretched or overworked. So, let's take chronic low back pain, for example. Most people think, well, my back really hurts, so logically it's got to be a back problem. And so they are getting massages on their back, they're getting chiropractic on their back, they're putting ice and heat packs on their back. They're foam rolling their back, whatever it is, it's focused on that spot, which, of course, that's common sense. I totally understand that and, have no judgment for going to the spot of pain. But the reality is there's usually some other place that's really constricted, and that's creating that overstretched feeling in your back. So I focus on both the how and the where. And usually once we can get pain to recede, that also really helps that contraction of the fascia because it's no longer needing to be in that fight or flight quite so often.
Yes, I love that. And I think that's so, so good and just such a good reminder of like so often where the pain is not where the problem is.
Yeah. And, fascia doesn't show up on an MRI. So a lot of times, if you've had chronic pain and you go to the doctor, you They look it over, they're not sure, they send you to get an MRI, and they're like, well, everything's fine. And then you're left feeling like you're an insane person that's making up this problem. But the reality is, like, it could be a fascial problem. You just can't see it because, again, it's more liquid than, maybe this analogy of plastic wrap, but it's similar. And so it just isn't quite dense enough unless you have really, really crazy, crazy dense fascia. It really doesn't show up on an MRI. And so you're stuck wondering, like, well, where is this pain even coming from? But it also could maybe be somewhere else in the body. So it's a process of figuring out what feels good for you.
Yeah. How do you go through with someone to like figure out if like it's all interconnected? It's like, you have like a protocol you go through for helping people like identify and like feel where the fascia is tight themselves, or like, how do you go about that?
Yeah,
That might be a big question, but
it is a bit multifaceted, but that's fine. We'll dive into it. Something I love about this work is it really forces you to be in your body and start understanding your own problem areas and what your texture really feels like. And then participate in the process of trying to move it around and change where it's at. I think that's such an interesting part of this is like a lot of times people will feel and say like, hey, I can feel there's a lot of tension here. I think we should focus here. And I do always like want to be sensitive to where someone else thinks there might be a problem, because I do know a whole series of pain patterns, as I call them, which is like common areas. Like for low back pain, the first places I go are in the quads and the hip flexors. Those tend to make an unbelievable difference to back pain. So I have those in my head where I'm like, well, if you're experiencing this thing, I have a list of places that I would go first. But I always want to give people the option of like, if you feel in your body that we should go here, we're going to go there, because no one knows your body better than you. I can't know someone's body better than they can. And so I still have times, I'm never bored in this job. There's still times where I'll release something that they asked for that I really wasn't sure it was going to play a role at all. And it did end up making a big difference. And it's like, I can't know those things. Only you and your understanding of your own body can know those things. But there are a lot of common patterns, a lot of the big things that people experience, like plantar fasciitis, knee pain, sciatica, low back pain, shoulder pain, neck pain. A lot of those have pretty common patterns that you can just go to those areas first and see how far you can get.
Do you mind sharing some of those patterns?
Yeah, sure. So I know there's a lot I just named off, but like, for example, let's see, plantar fasciitis, most people think that's a foot problem, but most of it is a lot of tension through the posterior fascial chain and the calf and the hamstring. So I find releasing those, again, with compression and active movement, not stretching, right? Stretching can honestly make it worse sometimes. We don't have 10 years to talk about how static stretching is like not the way anymore.
Let's just leave it at that. I don't think you're stretching. Maybe look into that a little, but okay, keep going.
Yes. So releasing the calf and the hamstring usually does wonders for plantar fasciitis. Knee pain, usually in the back of the calf and in the lower quad, make a big difference. It kind of depends on where you feel your knee pain, whether it's centralized or if it's more on one side or the other. Low back pain, as we talked before, quads and adductors are like my top two every time. With shoulder pain, it's usually the bicep, the pec, like the big part of the chest, and then the lat in the back. Those would be my top three. And then with neck pain, it's similar: biceps, pec, and then the front of the neck up in the scalings through the SCM tend to be the biggest component. So a lot of these patterns are kind of the opposite. It's on the opposite side of where you're feeling pain. Because again, usually where you're feeling pain is a bit overstretched. So if you can release the opposite side and that area no longer has to overstretch, the pain goes down pretty quick. So yeah, the back of the neck, you would actually want to go to the front of the chest and the neck. Low back pain, going through the quads and the adductors is just a totally different side of the body. See, in my mind, the adductors, that line of fascia runs up through the core. And so the core is the opposite of the low back. So it still makes sense to my brain that they're more opposites. But
No,
there's some
there.
Yeah, there's a guy, his name is Thomas Myers. He did all of the research around anatomy trains, which are interconnected lines of fascia that are going in the same direction, almost like a grain of wood. So if you hold on one end of your body, this whole series of bones and muscles would move with it. So I sometimes will use anatomy trains as well, and that's like a book you could pick up and really dive deep if you wanted to learn more about fascia. It's a bit of a dense read, but it might shine a lot of light, even just looking at the connected lines of fascia, to be like, oh my gosh, I've noticed all of this tension here, and this line directly goes through my low back, and maybe that's why my low back is hurting. So sometimes it's just that demystifying of pain that can be so helpful for our brains and our healing process.
Yes. And gosh, I just want to bring in a component here where you were talking about like fascia not being seen on an MRI, or kind of feeling like, okay, you're going to these people and they're like, everything's fine. And I see this in the chronic pain world, and I've talked about this a lot in my podcast, but I feel like here's just like one more component to like bring this to light of, I feel like in the mind-body world of chronic pain, people forget about the body all the time. And it's like they almost make it be all mind and nervous system, and really disregard the fact that there are actual physical changes that do happen. And while, yes, sometimes just addressing it from like a mind-body place, or like addressing stress or whatnot can, I mean, I'm curious of your take on this, but I've definitely seen it where when you bring down the threat response, especially if the threat is a, like what you were talking about, like this nebulous, like it's your job, right? Like it's not actually a real threat to the body. It's a perceived threat. That the fascia does relax with a like mindfulness session, or with going through and releasing like energy. So you can have that release without ever touching the body. However, when things have been going on for a while, I feel like you still need the actual physical release and need to address all the compensations that have happened just from holding all that stress. And over time, like the fascia literally like changes and just gets stuck. And so I just want to validate people for that, because I really feel like the mind-body world has like gone so far into the mind that they've just started like, ignoring the body. And it is like, it's such a pet peeve of mine, because like I love both. It's like, but guys, it was supposed to be mind-body, like not just mind. So I just feel like the fascia piece can be probably really validating for people who are like, but it still really hurts in this area, and like it feels very physical.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't understand how we can even separate the mind body or start choosing like what percentage is what, because they're so unbelievably interconnected, and I always find it interesting because you'll find people on opposite ends of the spectrum, right? You might see a doctor that just does not understand about anything except for clinical terms and clinical diagnosis. And then, you have people on the other end of the spectrum that's like, the only reason for your pain is because of a father wound that you had. And you're like, okay, well, can we find a middle ground? And I think
exactly.
fascia has a lot of that middle ground, because there is a physical, like you were saying, there is a physical response that happens from something in your mind, right? And then those things can be interchanged. If fascia becomes really tight, your brain can start to give different signals and change your thoughts. And I just don't see a way that you can separate them out. They both need work.
Yeah. I'm so on the same page. And I'm curious too, because what I have found, so it's like I'm a physical therapist, but then I've delved a lot into like mind body work, just like worked with people virtually, and never touched them at all, and never even done physical interventions and gotten massive results, right? But what I find sometimes is we have to work with building some safety sometimes to even work with a body. So it was like recently I had someone who we actually were just working on building the safety for her to go to a physical therapist, because she actually really had something that I'm like, you kind of need someone to like get your hands on there and do some specific strengthening. It was like, to me, a very like, without the emotional component, it was a pretty cut and dry, like physical therapy is going to make you feel better. But there was so much fear and anxiety there that she wouldn't go. And I think same thing with happens when you are really sensitive. It's like to do any type of fascial release feels like it's almost too much. So there can be some component of needing to build like nervous system safety before you're even ever able to approach it. Or sometimes what I'll find is the body almost like isn't ready for a release or isn't ready to let go because it doesn't trust that threat isn't going to be there. So it's like, no, I don't trust stopping to brace because we need to be bracing right now. So it's almost like fascial release. I'm curious, like how you approach this, because you bring in the emotional and the energy. I feel like the energetic side too, where it's like just approaching it purely physically of like, okay, use, a foam roller with some active movement on it or whatever, like won't work. Or maybe that's where they get the momentary. It's like, that feels great for 15 minutes. And then it's like right back to being tight. And that's where I feel like often my sense is the body is like, I don't trust releasing that. And either to me, it's because there's a threat still being perceived, or they don't actually have the physical strength to support the release. And it's like their fascia is like making up for physical strength. But feel free to like riff off of any of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, I will say fascia release is not a walk in the park, right?
Yeah,
you gotta get in there, and sometimes there is an incredible amount of sensation to it. Now, that being said, I've been telling people for years is like, okay, we can play with this line of where it's almost too much, but not quite. But for the average person, I would say keeping it at a maximum of a 7 out of 10 and definitely below that is really where you want to be, because you're exactly right. The body's not going to change if it doesn't feel safe. So you've got to be able to breathe through the sensation that you're feeling and move slowly and intentionally. But again, I wish I could give you some real science besides just like hundreds and hundreds of anecdotal evidence things here. But I think, again, that's where the active component makes this so different, because at any point in time, you can be like, cool, I'm done. I'm not going to go into that spot. Or sometimes simply the act of moving through sensation is, I mean, that's a pretty powerful metaphor. Just saying it like that is, if we're stuck in a freeze response, if we're stuck in a flight response, it's like, what happens if we actually stay in that sensation, but know that we can move through it? How does that change us energetically, as well as how does that actually move energy within the area that we're releasing with fascia? So I've seen over time, as people slowly ramp themselves up to more intensity, is they actually get much more resilient to stress, because they're building this skill set of like, hey, I'm feeling a lot of sensation right now, but I know that it's okay. I can stop whenever I want. I could, if they're in my office, they know that like I can tell Julia to get off me at any point, but they are essentially taking their power back through moving themselves. And so I see their resilience to stress just change over time, which I think is such a cool part of this work. And you don't even need to be with someone else. You can do this work on your own. I do fascia release on my own all the time. I just started training more practitioners in the last 2 years, but for the longest time I was like, I don't have anyone to work on me.
Yeah.
So I did it myself with, foam rollers and different tools. And I see just the same amount of success. And, with the people I've worked virtually as well are seeing the same amount of success with releasing on their own. But yeah, that safety component is overall, like a very important thing. Just know that it might not happen overnight. It's going to be something that you maybe build to. But sometimes it is more approachable to do it for yourself than have someone else do it and you don't know who they are. Maybe you don't vibe with their energy. Maybe you don't know how to tell them that they're going too hard or something doesn't feel right. Sometimes those roles of authority get strange. You think, okay, well, they wouldn't be doing this if they didn't think it would help, but it's crossing a boundary, and then your nervous system ends up rejecting that change that you're wanting to make. So sometimes maybe it is a better start to do it on your own.
Yeah. I love I love that last part. I want to say a little more about that, but also just the resilient building that you're seeing in that and just the empowerment. Oh my gosh, that's like one of my favorite things to really build the skill of is the skill of being with discomfort, but like intentional discomfort, chosen discomfort, discomfort that we know is going to lead to growth. Or might
feeling
lead to
better.
growth. Yeah, or feeling better. Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like,
Right.
can you struggle your way, not struggle, but like, can you breathe your way through an intense quad release
Yes.
exercise, knowing that your low back is going to feel so much better after?
Yeah, and I feel like we've really lost that skill. Or it just hasn't really been taught to a lot of us. I mean, like I feel like I notice I really struggle with that. It's like, oh, it should feel good and easy at all steps and all stages. And it's like, oh wait, like it doesn't. It really doesn't. It's like the whole choose your heart concept of like choose your heart of moving through this fascial thing or choose your heart of being stuck with knee pain because you're kind of not willing to or yeah, not open to moving through something uncomfortable. And I love that the way that you're approaching it of giving that power back of it's like you ultimately are able to stop movement or ask yourself or ask you to stop or whatever. Something I have worked with people, I just think that's a really cool concept and I could see it be like really good for um somebody who's working with someone like yourself is people who have discomfort with being like touched or have had maybe sexual trauma in the past and really don't trust going to a practitioner or having physical touch or just don't have a element of safe touch
Mhm.
is like when you're willing to I could just see it be such a good leeway to like start working with someone like maybe it's just starts over Zoom of just building the trust component there. And once that component is built there to practice the boundaries of like, okay, stop. Like, and it's like it starts to build that relationship of like there can be safe touch. Someone can be supporting me through something and all of that. Cause I find I've had a few clients just build really good like relationships with massage therapists or someone I'm kind of like, I really don't care who you're seeing. If it's like as long as you're getting the touch from someone that you just when I'm working over Zoom, at least it's like from someone that you trust
Mhm.
and you're able to be like, ask the question of like, wait, why are we doing this? Is this safe? And like be kind of like obnoxious about it and ask all the questions you need and take all the time, even if barely any treatment gets done and it's just starting to build that up. And I've seen really, really cool results in building that back up and building up kind of your inner voice and your own authority to set boundaries and start to trust yourself again.
Yeah. Wow. Beautifully said. That's so true. I think there is a really powerful part of having an advocate work with you when you're in that place. But yeah, sometimes that place just isn't possible for a while. I've worked actually with quite a few people with PTSD and sexual trauma and things like that. And there's a lot of communication that has to go on. There's a lot of I mean, I'm very sensitive to energy, so I'm pretty quick to read someone's body language or feel it or see it on their face to be like, "Ooh, we just passed a point that's not okay, and this person doesn't know how to tell me that it's not okay, so I'm gonna set that boundary for them." But it does grow, and as you get into that new wave of trusting whoever you're working with, yeah, it's life-changing to have that person that's there with you, like with you on the journey. Because sometimes, when you have the same thing going on for a really long time, people in your life maybe get tired of hearing about it, or they just try to very irritably offer you up solutions.
Yeah.
Like I've heard some similar things from all kinds of people in my life, but being able to again realize, okay, these people are great, but they're not really a full advocate for me, and finding that person can be incredible.
Oh, that is. And I feel like the fact that you can read energy like that is so huge because I think so often when you have not been in your body and you don't know what that's like, it's like you don't even notice a boundary has been crossed. And so when someone else can actually pick that up and point it out, all of a sudden you have a reference point of like, oh, wait, I did feel that like sinking feel in my stomach, or maybe my throat closed, right? Whatever it is. And it's like, you can now link, oh, when I feel like that, that means my boundary has been crossed. But I didn't know that, but you told it to me. Like you saw it in me and could point that out. And I feel like that can really actually, I think we underestimate or don't talk about that enough, about someone else being able to read your energy if you can't read it yourself or like point it out is so valuable. I mean, ultimately it's got to go through your own authority and like you got to be like, yes, that feels right. But yeah, I mean, I've had things pointed out to me that like, by a trusted coach and things where I'm like, oh shit, you're right. Like I did do that and I didn't pick up on it, right? It's so like ingrained, or it just wasn't even on my radar until they pointed it out. And then it's like, oh, now I have that reference point. Now I can take it into other areas of my life. So
Yeah, I can tell so much about someone's personality by how they approach fascia work, because a lot of nervous system patterns come out, like the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response comes out. Are people trying to rush through it? Are they holding their breath? Are they saying that everything's fine when it's not? Like I can just see so much when you put someone into these uncomfortable sensations and ask them to like, hey, you got to be involved. You're going to now do this thing. It's so fascinating to me, the things that you notice. And really, the way people approach fascia work is often how they approach almost anything in their life. So
that's so true. I love that. I'm just thinking about it more from the perspective of, like even how people approach, like, and when I'm in the clinic of, how they're taking any manual work or exercises and stuff. I'll have some people that are like, we'll go through an exercise and they'll do like 2 reps and they're like, okay, next. And I'm like, like just do 2 reps. Like, I'll do it at home. I'll do it later. Okay, what's next? And I'm like, okay, let's slow down. Take the time here, because I can guarantee you're not going to do it later by the way you just approached that. Yeah. So do you do most of your work one-on-one? I know I've seen some videos of yours online where you have some like instructional videos on approaching fascially. So how do you work with people?
Well, again, my practice is in Golden, Colorado, so I do work with people in person, and I I actually compress fascia with my foot, which my clients lovingly refer to as being stepped on. It's much more complicated than that.
I love it.
But yes, I will compress fascia with my foot, and then I talk them through a specific range of motion. However, I've found, as we were alluding to earlier, I found that you can really do the same thing on your own with tools like foam rollers and lacrosse balls. So instead of my foot adding the compression, we're adding the compression from a ball or from a roller, and then going through essentially that same exact range of motion. So I've been working with people virtually since COVID, as most of our stories, right? And I have a kind of do-it-yourself video library called Roller Remedy, which I've been having people use since, the last few years. And that's another way that people can start to tackle things themselves. I actually have quite a few people that have chronic pain use it, because they can kind of choose their own adventure and decide how much do they want to do. Is there just one area that they want to do? Do they want to do a stress relief routine? Do they actually want to tackle their specific pain? There's all different kinds of programs in there. But yeah, I've had a few people reach out. Like there was a girl who reached out to me a while back and was like, I was feeling pain and I was just going to take some ibuprofen like I normally do. And all of these like hilarious problematic things happened where like the cap flung off and like hit her in the eye, and then she like spilled all of these pills on the floor, and it was this whole dramatic thing. And she was like, you know what? I feel like the universe is just telling me you should go foam roll instead of taking this. And was like, wow, I feel just as much relief from doing that as I would have if I just would have, taken a bunch of ibuprofen. And so it's just like, thank you for giving me an option, because clearly, I can't just keep taking ibuprofen for the rest of my life. And like, there are other ways to start utilizing these things. And then, you can do it anytime, anywhere.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that. That's amazing. What a great story. I love it. Where do you see, I was going to ask one more question of like, where do you see strength pieces come into it? Because I've worked with a lot of hypermobile people or people who are so deconditioned that I've found even when it's like there is a fascial component, it becomes really challenging to release it. It's almost like muscles will like tense up more almost because again, it's like almost the fascia was what was holding them together because the muscles weren't strong enough. So I'm curious if you've seen that at all or you have a way of approaching it where it's just that you just don't see that as an issue.
Great question. So, couple things. I've worked on a lot of hypermobile people. It does not seem to overstretch them with this specific type of fascia work. And again, I think a big part of that is we're not trying to lengthen muscle fibers with this type of work because fascia is not a sausage casing that we're trying to stretch from the outside, right? It is a layer on layer on layer thing. So when we compress it and actively move, what's really happening inside is we're shearing all of these different fibers in a more three-dimensional way in that spot. And so I haven't found that anyone has gotten like overstretched or it's like increase their hypermobility in a way that felt very destabilizing. I've even worked with people with like Ehlers-Danlos that their connective tissue is too stretchy or, it's not really doing it. And this work does not seem to aggravate that already hypermobility that they have. That being said, I will want to work on the areas that do feel like they need the fascial release side of it. But then I almost always send them to a physical therapist or a trainer or someone who can start implementing the strength component. Because you can correct me if I'm wrong, Andrea, but hypermobility isn't like a death sentence. You can actually retrain your muscles to only go that certain length instead of just continuing to go into that hypermobility place. So that does take retraining and it does take strength. So that's not something that I tackle in my specific area of business, but I absolutely refer out all the time for that strength component.
No, I love that. And yeah, no, I appreciate that so much. And you are absolutely spot on. Ehlers-Danlos or hypermobility is not like strengthening is so important. And I do find fascial stuff or that like, well, I call it pin and stretch. I'm like, oh, I guess that's a lot of fascial work. It works amazingly for hypermobility because you are otherwise hypermobility. They're just like stretching all their ligaments before they ever get to muscles or fascia or any of that. So it's like the pin and stretch, the compression that you're doing. It's like that keeps it targeted at the muscle or at the fascia and is not damaging ligament. So it's like that makes so much sense. And yeah, I have found it gives relief, but yeah, I think that strengthening component is really important too. So I love that you approach it that way. And I love the again, collaboration approach because
yeah, we all have our realms of genius. And there are times where you wrap up your side and you're like, this is so great. You're out of pain. You're feeling good. Now the whole idea is how do we keep you there? And so some of that is continuing to do fascia release because for the most part, unless you've had something like a car accident or a really, really intensely traumatic event, it usually takes a long time for fascia to start to tighten and become restricted. And so when you tackle it head on like that and release fascia quickly, unless you're constantly being re-triggered and re-traumatized by something else in your life, it stays and it stays in a happier state for a longer period of time. So you don't have to do fascia release as much. And then the strength component is such a great next step because it's like, well, let's keep everything in this happy state.
yeah.
Okay. So there is that, I do maybe discourage certain types of exercise because fascia wants to be fluid. It wants to be mobile and springy and bouncy. And so the more we can move dynamically and with our whole body, usually the better. So, not doing something that's really crazy intense all the time or loading the same joints over and over again in a very rigid format, like, just doing, this is kind of a poor example, but just a bunch of bicep curls, in the same range of motion over and over again, like not great, right? Your body doesn't really work like that. So, fascia loves movement and anything that can be a little bit more dynamic and fluid is usually a great place to start.
I love that. And I think that's I see that a lot with people. They'll be like coming in and they're like, yeah, I've been going to the gym for the past 5 years and doing like the exact same routine. Like my dad has literally been doing the exact same exercise routine for like 30 years. And
Oh my gosh, we must talk about our dads at another point because yes, my dad has also he's been going 3 times a week for like 40 years and it's just the same routine every time. It's unbelievable.
and it's like, that's great. At least you are doing something, but like, oh my gosh, he's like the stiffest person ever. It's just great. I don't think he listens to this. But yeah, it's like I see that a lot. It's like we get into our ruts. We do what's comfortable. And even if it's like not the exact same routine, I feel like we're all like, okay, let's go squat. Let's, maybe do some lunge. Even if you're doing like good active motions, it's like if it's the same thing basically over and over and you're just cycling through the same motion, chances are you could use a little revamp.
Yeah, one of the most important ways we can get that hydration to all the areas of our body is through movement. So if you think about needing to move every part of your body in order for the water to get there, that might help. Because if you're just doing squats, if you're just doing bicep curls, if you're doing things in a more rigid way, like, do you have enough space in your ribs? Do you have enough space in your pelvic floor? Like, we're told over and over again, like, squeeze your core, hold these things in so tight. But I mean, at the end of the day, we're not going to get our fascia moving and the hydration we're looking for with something like that. It's kind of like an aquarium, right? Like if our fascia is not healthy, it's like you have not turned on the aquarium. Like it's just stagnant. It's maybe starts growing some things. Nothing is really healthy in that environment, right? But as soon as you start moving everything in the body, you're turning the aquarium on and now everything is flowing and is able to get to where it needs to go. And so the rigidity component of working out is like, yeah, how can you make this more fluid? How can you move every part of you? Can you just hang on a bar for a while? Can you get some traction in? Can you, I don't know, bear crawl around? There's so many ways that you can get in a full body movement to keep that pump going. And if you're in a lot of pain and you're thinking like, yeah, I wish I could do that, but my body even hurts too bad to do a workout, that's another great reason that fascia release can be so helpful because you can get that pump going and the movement and the hydration component going simply by working on your fascia without necessarily needing to move. And hopefully it'll get you to a point that you can move because that is so essential.
Yes, I love that. What do you do for exercise? If you don't
Oh,
mind me
well,
asking.
I am lucky enough to live in Colorado, so I do a lot of hiking. I have two dogs that have the energy of like 1,000 dogs. So there's a lot of chasing them around and playing with them. But I do a lot of hanging. I do some strength training. I really mix it up. That's also my personality. I have a really hard time sticking with just one thing. So, but yeah, I do as much play type of movement as I can. My husband and I have a lot of like toys at our house that we'll just, like throw things around, or I have a rebounder that I'll bounce on a little bit. I'll just see where the day takes me.
I love it. No, that's awesome. I feel like I just told my husband about this and then I'll let you go because I want to be respectful of your time. But I'm like, I feel like we need more gyms that have that like novelty approach and the like, today we're doing yoga and tomorrow we're doing mobility and the next day we're doing like primal movements and animal. And I'm like, why does that not exist? Because like who can afford like 10 memberships, right, to be able to access all these different programs? Like it's like such a pet peeve of mine. I'm like, why is there not like mobility and full movement gyms? And I was like, if I was interested in teaching that, it would be a great business plan. And I'm not. So I'm not going to do that. But if anyone wants to, I feel like it'd be very successful.
I think so too. I think you're right. We've got a lot of options, especially in Colorado. This place is very health and fitness focused. So I have seen a lot of very interesting, more primal movement places.
Cool. Okay, we don't.
But yeah, sometimes you want a mix of things, and so even if there are some cool, more natural movement types of gyms, you're like, but what about the days I want to do this and this? Yeah.
Right? I'm like, I just need a gym that's got like a rock climbing thing on one wall and like yoga in this corner and like CrossFit in that corner, and it'd be really
I mean, your body would love it too. Like the body is not meant to do the same things over and over and over again. Like, to all of my CrossFit people, I love you, but doing 150 plus squats every week is hard. Like with a lot of weight, that's just your body is gonna start shifting and will probably your fascia will start molding into a position that it thinks will help you get through those activities, but it may not necessarily be the ideal position, right? Because ideally our body is able to move freely in all different directions and not just be in the best position for you squatting with weight, with a back squat.
Totally. And someone who has done CrossFit for quite a while, and then now I stopped for a while, and now I just restarted in January, and now I'm like, I think I'm going to stop again. It's like, because I've noticed my body like tighten up, because it's so easy. Even if you're like, for any other CrossFitters listening that are like, we don't just back squat. I know that's everyone listening though, so I'm just going to cut out. Is like, trust me, it doesn't matter. Like I'm very, very like aware of my movement patterns, and it is so challenging within a prescribed workout to use your full range of motion and to like move through it and not just be trying to get through the workout. And it's like still so many of the movements, even if you're snatching and doing toes to bar and doing handstands and whatever, it's still not the full range of motion at all. Yeah, it's supposed to attest to that.
Your fascia grows a lot slower than your muscle. So I worked out of a CrossFit gym for like 6 years. So I definitely know about CrossFit, but fascia it takes more time for it to grow. And so a lot of times the typical CrossFit model is, hey, come as many days as you possibly can. And if you really love it, people are going 5-6 days a week. And fascia doesn't have time to grow with the amount of muscle that you're producing. And that's why a lot of people see injuries at the beginning of, in their first couple of months of CrossFit is like they built muscle faster than their fascia could grow. And that density of the muscle does make it more challenging for fascia to be, this nice, hydrated, like spongy body. It just makes it more difficult. That's not to say CrossFit is bad or building muscle is bad. Like we need that strength component, but it's just to think about like, what does your body really need? Does it feel good to do that many workouts per week? Are you really sore? Does it take a long time to recover? Are you having these aches and pains? Like really any aches and pains is a sign that fascia is probably involved in some way. So just something to be mindful of. It's easy to want to push through and feel like, I don't know, there's a lot of those highs of working out because it's really difficult or because you accomplish something at the end. While those are great feelings, we got to stay in touch with our body, because a lot of times with all the CrossFit people I've worked with over the years, sometimes it's not as helpful as they think when they really start to get in touch with their body. They're like, man, I love this, but I'm definitely going to back it off. And maybe I'm only doing CrossFit like 2 or 3 times a week. And it seems to show a big improvement.
Absolutely. I so agree with that. Any last like words for people who are listening?
Well, I would just say, as someone who spent, 20 plus years in a state of feeling like there was absolutely nothing that could be done, just, well, you may have just not found the thing yet. And so anyone out there listening that feels really discouraged or feel like nothing's working, maybe they need to work on their fascia. Maybe they haven't been working on it in the right spot. Like there are other answers out there, and keep looking. Like your body knows how to heal itself. You just need to find the right thing that opens up that opportunity for you.
Oh, I love that. Where can people find you?
Well, I'm the most active on Instagram, which is at Movement by Julia. But if you're, any listeners out there are curious for, what entails this specific style of foam rolling that I'm talking about, I am offering a free week of roller remedy if you want to start diving into this on your own. So that's at movementbyjulia.com/podcast. And you can start rolling. Again, sometimes it only takes a week for you to understand if this thing is going to be really helpful for you. So if you'd like to do that, you can go there.
Oh, thank you so much for that offer. That's amazing. Very cool. Well, thank you so much. I feel like I could ask you a million more questions, but
No, it's so easy. We could talk forever.
I know this was so great. I so appreciate you coming on here and sharing this just wonderful expertise of yours.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.